So this is going to be a general overview of my work exposing the true nature of the corporate controlled music industry. So I've been doing this for 250 years. No, actually it's best part of 20. It just feels like 250. And I've been putting out books on these subjects for the past 10 years. It's just coming up on 10 years since the first volume of Musical Truth. So I thought I'd just encapsulate a lot of that information into a quite brief presentation for you this evening. This really does only just scratch the surface. There's so much more to say, but you will go away from this feeling very betrayed and pissed off, and your nostalgic attachment to your favorite band will be completely destroyed, because that's what I do. Not through intention, but that's just the way it goes. So my background is as a DJ. I was a full-time radio and club DJ for many years. Never expected to be doing what I'm doing now. But things got to round about 2008 when I came to realise that the world is nothing like we've spent our entire lives being told it is. And so I fell down about 500 different rabbit holes all at once. Got into researching conspiracies and all alternative subjects and such. And I really wanted to know how all these themes and all these subjects played out in the music industry of which I'd been a part. And that's what led to the publication of my book series. So the first volume of Musical Truth 1 was in early 2016, then volume 2 in 2018, volume 3 in 2021. And as Niall just mentioned there, I've just brought out the fourth volume, which is titled No One's Dad's a Plumber. And now you know why it's called that. So my research into these subjects pretty much takes me back to the mid-1950s. So I could probably have gone back further. I could probably have looked at classical music composers. I've no doubt there's things to know about them. But my starting point is 1955. So we're on 70 years now. And that was the birth of the sort of modern rock and roll era. So this was the year where Bill Haley and his Comets first came along. Used to be Bill Haley and the Comets, but that's the Mandela effect for you. These days it's his Comets. So they had what was quite a revolutionary record in 1955 called Rock Around the Clock. This was very different to anything which had gone before. They'd come out in 1954 with their song Shake, Rattle and Roll, and then they built on it with Rock Around the Clock. And this was ushering in the modern rock and roll era. So the following year, you had the emergence of Elvis Presley, and then there were all these other American rock and roll acts, Chuck Berry and Jerry Lee Lewis and Buddy Holly and all the others. Rock Around the Clock basically defined the age of the teenager, because prior to that time, mid-1950s, the word teenager was not in circulation. And it was social engineering 101. So whenever you have any kind of fad, trend, movement, scene, aspect of culture, which affects large numbers of people and sweeps up millions of them in their wake, you can be sure that the social engineers working through military-grade operations will have had a hand in it somewhere. Sure enough, when we go back to the very early record labels that we've all heard of, the very famous ones going back to those early days of the industry, we find some very obvious and very direct links into expressions of the military. So one good example is RCA, which was Elvis Presley's label, and that stands for the Radio Corporation of America. And it was developed directly out of the US Navy. And they were experimenting with things like radio systems, radar, sonar, different methods of sonic technology. And that morphed into them becoming a record label and starting to release some of these major names who were going to redefine youth culture. Over in Britain, we had a counterpart, which was EMI, Electrical Mechanical Industries. The proprietor was Sir Joseph Lockwood, who was an aristocrat and part of the establishment furniture. And this also was a military grade operation. All the record labels actually in those early days, Decca, Thorn EMI, Parlophone, were all involved in the same sort of research, which was experimenting with sound, what could be achieved through sonic manipulation. And this just played out into the artists that they put out on these labels. So here's Elvis Presley. His career got going in 1956, the first rock and roll superstar. And he's pictured here with Colonel Tom Parker, who was his manager. Spoiler alert, he wasn't a real colonel. It was a nickname that was given to him. He was actually a Dutchman, and he came over to America in quite ambiguous circumstances. He's got a very shady background, and this is alluded to in the Baz Luhrmann movie Elvis, which came out about 3 years ago, that you might have seen. Going into Colonel Tom Parker's background, is portrayed by Tom Hanks in that movie. And so Parker exerted quite a strong hold over Elvis's career, leading many to suspect that he was actually his handler. Because with so many of these household name artists, these A-listers, these famous people that you've all heard of, they've been subjected to trauma-based mind control of the type put out there by the CIA as part of their far-reaching MK Ultra program. So we'll get into that. But wherever you find a mind control subject, a handler is never far from the surface. And often the handlers, those that are put in to keep a close eye on them, keep them on a tight rein, make sure they keep pushing the agendas that have been set out for them, and most importantly, make sure they don't stray from that and start speaking their own mind. They're often people that are very close to them. So they can be romantic partners, spouses in many cases, who are in an ideal position to keep an eye on these people. A few years after Elvis, we had the emergence of the Beatles, and this was a masterclass in social engineering, really, because they were, when they first started out, a rhythm and blues band. They were taking rhythm and blues music from America and repackaging it, and then successfully selling it back to the Americans under the guise of the so-called British invasion. All these bands coming out of England that were really taken into the heart of America. And that all started with the Beatles touching down at JFK Airport in New York in February of 1964, going on the Ed Sullivan Show and becoming overnight sensations in that nation. In large part, providing a distraction to the trauma of the Kennedy assassination, which had occurred just a few weeks before, in November of 63. Then along come the Beatles, February 64, and suddenly Americans are no longer mourning the loss of their president, asking awkward questions about what went on that day, and instead they're lapping up all this great music from this fantastic group from Liverpool that they've basically been entrained and instructed to like, because that's how social engineering works. A group or an artist or a scene is served up to the public, and the public is coerced into liking it and adhering to it. And if the operation has been truly successful, the public believes that they've chosen this band for themselves, and this has been a decision that they've made for themselves, the fact that they like them. They don't realise that there's some very cunning manipulation that goes on behind the scenes. It's psychological manipulation, and again, it's military grade. So many researchers feel that the Beatles were actually a military-grade operation and that they were the product of the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations in London, which is like the #1 social engineering think tank basically in the world. That's where all kinds of cultures and fads and trends and movements are fomented and put out there. As to just why it is that John Lennon and Paul McCartney, the real one, we'll get to that, were the most successful singer-songwriter duo of the 20th century, and also the frontmen of arguably the most prominent and influential pop music band of all time, I wonder if the answer to that could lie in this interesting picture. So, do we have any Freemasons in the house tonight? Any Freemasons? Come on, don't be shy, speak up. No, no one ever answers yes to that question. I'm sure there's some local lodges around here somewhere. So they're giving it what I'm told by those in the know is a Freemasonic handshake. And if these two did indeed come out of Freemasonic families, it would explain so much as to why their group was propelled to such prominence. Because you do not get to be as successful and as influential as the Beatles were and still are unless you have a facilitated career handed to you on a plate. Quite simply, it doesn't happen any other way. Here are John and Paul. Notice that Ringo and George are not striking this same pose, but they're putting their hands inside their jackets. And this is an occult method of communication within certain groups and fraternities, particularly Freemasonry, and it denotes the hidden hand. It's letting those with the eyes to know realise that these are assets, and they're in the club. The hidden hand denotes the secret society network to which Freemasonry belongs, and various other groups as well. And it will be the case that many of these famous people are part of these networks. And that is another big key to just why they've been so successful. How many people have read this great book from the late David McGowan called Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon? Anyone read this? Just a couple? Yeah, okay. Well, it comes highly recommended as bedtime reading. So this is a book that was put out there by basically a regular guy, not a plumber, but he was a construction worker named Dave McGowan in Los Angeles. And he was a fan of mid to late 1960s music, the counterculture music, folk rock, country rock, psychedelic rock, all these changing styles of music that were coming out of California in those times. Bit of a hobby of his. And he was reading a book on Laurel Canyon, which is this neighborhood in the Hollywood Hills overlooking Los Angeles, where pretty much all the influential bands and musicians from that era congregated for some reason. They were getting drawn in magnet-like from all over the United States, from Canada, in some cases from England. The group The Animals from Newcastle went over there and based themselves in Laurel Canyon. And McGowan wondered what it was about this place that was drawing all these music makers in. Well, in Laurel Canyon was a covert military research base known as Lookout Mountain. And this is where a large number of propaganda films were produced on behalf of the American government and the American military. Reportedly, in the years that it was operational, some 20 odd years, more propaganda films were produced in Lookout Mountain than in all the major studios in Hollywood combined. So McGowan also did a bit of digging into the family backgrounds of these musicians. And this is where the title to my book, No One's Dad's a Plumber, comes in, because I've been picking up on the research that Dave McGowan did. He discovered that, without exception, the fathers of all these major music makers who were shaping and moulding culture in those times and changing the face of music in the mid to late 1960s had fathers who were directly connected to the world of the military. And this wasn't just low-ranking foot soldiers, you know, this was high-ranking generals, admirals, lieutenant colonels, these kinds of ranks. One of the best examples of this dynamic, which we have, comes from the frontman of The Doors, Jim Morrison. So here he is, top left, pictured on the ship that his father commanded, a naval warship. That's his old man there on the right, Admiral George Stephen Morrison, Jim Morrison's dad. So the first picture there of Jim is in 1964, and he's looking very clean cut, and he's got short hair, and there he is with his dad hanging out on his ship. The picture down below is from just 1 year later, 1965, when the Doors have emerged fully formed as these new icons, these poster children for the anti-war, anti-establishment generation. They're embodying all the angst of the young people of that time about what was going on in Vietnam and many of the other social justice movements that were active at that time. One thing that we need to note about Admiral George Stephen Morrison is that he was the Navy Admiral in charge of the fleet of ships involved in the Gulf of Tonkin false flag PSYOP. So this is the event which, it's been admitted by the American military, it never happened. They made it up, and it was used to justify the escalation of America in the Vietnam War. So how do we reconcile Jim Morrison, the iconic poster child for this anti-war generation? He's up there on stage as frontman of the Doors with his shirt off, he's exposing himself, he's doing drugs, he's getting drunk, he's talking about all this stuff, and he's encouraging that sort of behavior in the audience, with the fact that his old man basically started the Vietnam War. Well, I've got a piece of interesting video footage here which might give us part of the answer.
Will the university be ready to meet his ambitions? Will his parents have been sufficiently interested in his future to have concerned themselves with the needs of their universities?
to inform you that we are unable to accept your application.
Anyone you recognise? There's young Jim, and that's from 1964, and there he is doing a commercial for Florida State University. 1 year later, he's the front man of the Doors. And this is because he was effectively an actor, or what is referred to as a lifetime actor. So this is a term that was coined by the author and researcher Joseph Atwill. A lifetime actor is somebody who's in the public eye, they're a household name, everybody's heard of them. But when you get into the truth of their affiliations and their family backgrounds, it often tells a quite different story. They're pushing agendas, and their role is to shape and mould and affect and influence the way people think about things, to affect their perceptions. I've got a picture of Bob Marley here. Now, if there are any Bob Marley fans in the house, don't worry, I'm not actually going to diss him. This is a rare exception because I do personally feel that Bob Marley was that rarest of entities, a genuine music maker who was sincere and was genuine and was putting out proper message music. That's why they got rid of him, because he was a threat. In the centre here, we've got Bob Marley's old man, and he fulfills a lot of the same criteria as Jim Morrison's old man, in that he was a British naval officer, Norvell Sinclair Marley. So that's Bob's mother on the right, who was a black Jamaican woman, but his old man was white, British, attached to the Navy, and he ran a slave plantation in Jamaica. You couldn't make it up, and you don't have to, because the Matrix does that for you. So there was an attempt on Bob Marley's life in 1976 when he was due to perform at a political concert that was going to unite the rival factions within Jamaica at that time. The assassination attempt failed, and Bob went on to perform the concert, but he became a marked man, in my view, from that point on, and the CIA got him in the end. So the story is that he broke his toe playing football. It turned gangrenous, cancerous, and it spread throughout his body. But there is an alternative take on what really happened in that story. Don't really have time to get into it now, but it is in my first book. Another musician from Laurel Canyon from those times, mid to late 60s, the counterculture, was Frank Zappa, of Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. And his father ticks all the right boxes, again, just like Jim Morrison's dad and the fathers of all those musicians coming out of Laurel Canyon. So Frank Zappa's dad worked in biological chemical weapons research out of the Edgewood Arsenal military base in Maryland, which is where Frank grew up. And in kindergarten at that particular military base was Frank's wife, Gail Slopeman, who attended that naval kindergarten with a young Jim Morrison. So all these musicians effectively knew each other. This is the Grateful Dead. They were also poster children, if you like, for that sort of hippie, flower power, counterculture scene. And the affiliations of these various members do not disappoint. We've got direct connections into Freemasonry, again. We've got connections into Harvard and Yale University. All the sort of connections that you wouldn't necessarily expect to find before you set out on this sort of research when it comes to hippie bands like this. And then you've got Bob Weir, the key member of the group, who is directly attached to Bohemian Grove. And there's an interview from quite recent times where Bob Weir is asked about his involvement in Bohemian Grove, and he's a bit awkward and, shuffles nervously in his seat. And then he just goes on to say, well, Bohemian Grove is basically just a supper club. It's just where folk go to escape from it all and socialise and stuff. Sure it is, buddy. That's all that goes on there. Yeah, don't worry about it. But, these people are never who you think they are. How about Dave Grohl? Has anyone wondered how Dave Grohl became famous and prominent and got his own group, the Foo Fighters, after he was the drummer within Nirvana? Well, let's have a look at his family background, shall we? Dave Grohl was earlier in a punk band out of DC, that most rock and roll of cities. His father, James Harper Grohl, worked in politics as an assistant to Robert A. Taft Jr. Robert's father was William Howard Taft, the 27th President of the United States. And his father was Alfonso Taft, who was a founder of the Skull and Bones occult secret society operating out of Yale University. And, a bit there about his role in the presidential campaign in 2004. But we can see from this that Dave Grohl is connected. That's why he's famous. That's why he was given that band. We're led to believe that these people make it to the top through hard work and good luck alone. Doing a bit of networking, bit of hobnobbing, a few lucky breaks. Comes down to more than that. Meet the Copelands. So there was a patriarch of this particular family, Miles Axe Copeland, and he was a CIA legend, a career spy. Worked for the agency for multiple decades. He had postings all around the world. And he had 3 sons, all of whom were born in Beirut, which is a major CIA stronghold. So we've got, going from the left, Ian Copeland, now deceased, Stuart Copeland, who you might recognise as the drummer in the group The Police, and Miles Copeland Jr. And all 3 of these were put to use in the music industry. They had various operations. They had a sort of umbrella holding company, which they called Copeland International Artists, or CIA. It's not as if they didn't like to give the odd clue to those that were paying attention. They had an artist booking company, which they called Frontier Booking International. They also had a record label, which they called International Records Syndicate. So they were effectively mocking people to their face, not that many noticed it at the time, by naming their companies this way, because the Police, the band, and all these other bands involved in the punk and new wave scene in both Britain and America, because the Copelands had a stranglehold on that particular genre to the point that they were gatekeepers. So if you wanted to be successful in the punk and new wave scenes, you effectively had to go through the Copelands. And then they had their house band, the Police, as in they were there to police all the other bands that got through. And that's the Police with Sting, as in a sting operation. What's a sting operation? It's one that takes you by surprise and you never see it coming. We're asked to believe that Gordon Sumner became Sting because he used to turn up for sessions in a yellow and black striped jersey that made him look like a bumblebee. Sure, yeah, I'm buying that one. Here's Jinx Dawson, real name Esther Dawson, but she's known as Jinx, and she's the front woman of a group called Coven. They emerged at the psychedelic era, at the tail end of the 1960s, and they openly espoused witchcraft. Made no bones about it, they had a famous album called Witchcraft Destroys Minds and Reaps Souls. And on the back of this album, they depicted an actual satanic black mass taking place. So, who are this group? Why were they put out there? This is Esther Dawson in her own words from an interview. She said, I am of the Mayflower Society, a direct descendant of John Howland, 13th signatory of the Mayflower Compact. Members of my family were also active in Freemasonry. You don't say. Glad we're all sitting down to recover from the shock. My father was a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Mason, and my grandfather, a former Lieutenant Governor of Indiana, was High Priest of the Royal Arch Masons. My great-grandfather was in the private circle of US President Teddy Roosevelt, and we're listed in the book The First Families of America, so I'm steeped in American Illuminati, right there in her own words. This comes from Madonna. It's a monologue from her Virgin Tour promotional video of 1985, where she says at the start, I went to New York, I had a dream. I wanted to be a big star. I didn't know anybody. I wanted to dance, I wanted to sing, I wanted to do all those things. I wanted to make people happy. I wanted to be famous. I wanted everybody to love me. I wanted to be a star. I worked really hard and my dream came true. Because that's all it takes, folks. You've just got to want it, never give up on that dream, and you too could be as successful as Madonna. Honestly, that's the way it works. It's not. It only works that way if you're born into the right/wrong families. And these are not the kind of families you would want to be born into. Trust me. So when Lady Gaga first emerged in about 2008 and her career took off, a lot of people stated, oh, she reminds me of Madonna. Yeah, they're cousins. That'll be why. So Lady Gaga was fashioned and shaped in the same form that Madonna had been a generation earlier because they come out of the same families. Madonna is also a cousin, it turns out, of the US chat show host Ellen DeGeneres. And this is all coming through Madonna's French-Canadian mother, Madonna Louise Fortin, which is where all the interesting bloodline connections come. Also in that family, we have direct connections into Justin Trudeau, also Justin Bieber. All of these people are related one way or another through their French-Canadian roots. Dom from Sheep Farm Studios. Got any Sheep Farm fans in the house? Yeah, there you go. So, Dom sits in a darkened basement 17 and a half hours a day researching ancestry charts and genealogy and stuff. And he turns up loads of examples of this nature. So these are by no means isolated. I've quoted some of his examples in the new book, but any given episode of Sheep Farm will, of course, give you plenty more. So all these people are connected. Camilla, whatever the hell she is, she's connected into this whole sorry mess. She's a cousin of Madonna, a cousin of Celine Dion. They're all related. And even Charles, Lord Sausage Fingers, he's in the mix as well. And this article came out many years ago, and this was put together by professional genealogists. So those whose full-time job it is to go through family trees and rake through all these connections. It's based around village idiot Bush, who's at the centre of it all. But it revealed that one way or another, he is connected, usually as a cousin, to all these people. Barack Obama, Dick Cheney, his own vice president, John Kerry, his own presidential opponent. So what a great choice Americans had in that particular election, eh? Which cousin who attended Skull and Bones at Yale do you choose? This one or this one? Ain't democracy great, folks? Then you got Tom Hanks, you got Brad Pitt, you got Celine Dion, Hugh Hefner, Marilyn Monroe, all kinds of people, all kinds of crazy stuff in there. So that's key to how so many of these people get selected. It's not always down to family connections, but in many cases it is. It's down to the bloodlines that they come out of. In terms of other practices which routinely go on in the music industry, I want to play you a recording now from a guy who was known as John Todd. He's sometimes referred to as John Todd Collins or as Lance Collins. And he comes out of one of these prominent Illuminati bloodline families. He was put to use in the music industry. That was his assigned role, and he had various executive jobs. But for whatever reason, in the 1970s, he broke away from all of that, and he became a born-again Christian, and he became a whistleblower. He started speaking out about a lot of the stuff that he'd experienced during his time in the record industry. So we're going to take a listen to what he had to say here during one of his testimonies, and we'll consider what he said directly after this.
And that son that I came was a man named David Crosby. Crosby's still actually young. I saw David the day before Christmas last year. Talked with him. I got him away from this witch that he had with him. He told her to go shopping. We were in West Hollywood, and I was witnessing around to people that I knew. We went off in this store and we started talking. I said, David, I'd like to ask you a couple questions. I said, I already know the answers, but I've been gone for 5 years. I'd like to know certain things are still the way they were when I left. I said, now I'll have to explain some of this when I'm done, but you're not going to understand it. I'll let you know something about music. I said, do they still take the master to the temple room? And he said, yeah. I said, do they still have a Tobin conjure demons into the master? He said, of course. I said, now I got to know something. What's the main reason for rock music? Come on, Lance, you know what the reason is. Please, David, I don't want to guess. Tell me what the main reason is. He said, the same as when you were in, so that we can play spells on people that we couldn't cast spells upon.
So this goes back all the way to the question of what this world is and who really runs things. So back to my very early days of coming to realise that the world is nothing like we're told it is. All aspects of organised society are basically run by groups and networks of Satanists and psychopaths. I wish I had some better news for you, but I'm sure you all realise this anyway, otherwise you wouldn't be at this event. So it's Satanists and psychopaths everywhere, and this filters down into every aspect of organised society. So why would it be any different in the music business to as in the world of politics, the world of science, the world of the military, the mainstream media, any of this stuff. It's not. And it's coming right there from Lance Collins himself. I'm not making this stuff up. He says that in the 1970s, it was standard practice for all the major record labels to take the master tape recording of an album that they wanted to put out there into the public into what's referred to as an altar room. And he says that they would then bring in a coven of witches to cast a dark hex or spell on that master tape recording. The idea being that every copy that was then made and printed up to vinyl eventually and put out there into people's homes would carry some of that signature dark energy in the recording by way of vibrational frequency and intention. That's what he says was happening in the analog era. So we can only imagine how much that game has been stepped up in the digital era, where all sorts of things could be getting stripped into digital recordings on an unseen level without anyone's conscious knowledge. I learned a lot during those early days from this great website, a really good resource called The Vigilant Citizen. VigilantCitizen.com is still going, and this website's speciality is symbolism, signs, symbols, sigils, and what they all mean. Because these occultists that we have presiding over all these different aspects of our lives communicate by way of symbols. It's very important to them. It's part of their ritualistic belief systems. The famous Freemason Manly P. Hall once commented, "When the human race learns to read the language of symbolism, a great veil will fall from the eyes of men." So symbolism is the key to so much. This is the Mickey Mouse Club coming out of Disney. The Disney Corporation, as I'm sure many of us realise, is not the squeaky clean, family-friendly, nice company that they portray themselves to be. They are satanic, they are extremely dark, and a lot of really bad stuff goes on there. They groom a lot of these child stars to become future pop stars. And it goes, a lot of it happens through the Mickey Mouse Club. So in this particular year, we've got a young Britney Spears, a young Justin Timberlake, and a young Christina Aguilera. And all of them would go on to have major careers as pop stars, getting groomed by Disney. There's a piece of symbolism that comes out of Disney, which is connected to the character of Mickey Mouse, the Mickey Mouse ears. So every now and again you see celebrities pictured with Mickey Mouse ears, and this means something. So we're going here into the realms of trauma-based mind control and satanic ritual abuse. And this is horrific practices which are carried out on many of these children from early childhood to prepare them for this life in the spotlight. The Mickey Mouse ears are said to be a visual representation of the old days of cine cameras, where you would have 2 reels of film loaded onto a camera projector, and when you would look at it in silhouette, it would look something like the ears that we now associate with Mickey Mouse. And what it's denoting is the dissociation from reality that one of these mind control subjects experiences. So when they're subject to this horrific trauma, it causes the mind to dissociate from reality and to create these different alters, each of which can be programmed with their own personalities. That's why you get multiple personality disorder coming out of many of these celebrities. That's why they behave so strangely and so erratically in so many cases, because they're actually switching in and out of these different mind control alters that have been created for them. So this is what's happening with Britney Spears, and that's what's being symbolized there. And it's also being symbolized here by Madonna. So Madonna comes out of one of these important bloodline families, but just because you do, it doesn't preclude you from being subject to all this programming. In fact, you're more likely than ever to be subject to it, because these bloodline types, these so-called Illuminati families, traumatize their own offspring so that they can be brought into the program. And just looking at the law of reversal here, the fact that Satanists invert everything, if we take the name Mickey in that very distinctive Disney font that we're all familiar with, when you do a mirror image reversal of it, that's the word that comes out. Different ways of symbolizing the presence of mind control, particularly with female artists. This is Nicki Minaj, the rapper, going back many years to when she first emerged. She was pictured as a Barbie doll, and her nickname was actually Barbie. Her female fans were known as Barbs. And so a doll symbolizes a female asset who's been subject to mind control programming because they've been relegated to little more than a doll. This is one of Nicki Minaj's videos. It's called Out of My Head. She's there with pink hair, like she's a Barbie doll. She's in a straitjacket in some sort of mental cell. You know, go figure. Whenever you see artists pictured with butterflies, particularly this very distinctly coloured monarch butterfly, this means something as well. This is from a Mariah Carey album. It's a greatest hits album. There's no ostensible reason for a butterfly to be on that sleeve. But monarch programming, so-called, is a division of MK mind control, coming out of the CIA, and many female celebrities will have been subject to monarch programming. It's one that's reserved specially for singers and Hollywood actresses. So this is another sly, cute little way of the occultists communicating that this is one of theirs and that she's undergone this treatment. And sure enough, there have been stories about Mariah Carey suffering various breakdowns and going on various incoherent rants, all of which is very consistent with the presence of mind control programming. An absolute classic came from this video interview with Britney Spears from quite a few years ago now. And this video used to be all over the internet. You could get it everywhere. If you search for it now, it's been all but scrubbed. It's very difficult to get hold of. So when you find these videos, you really do need to download them there and then and store them offline because a lot of them disappear overnight. So I've jacked this particular copy from this guy's website, but it's Britney Spears being interviewed by Diane Sawyer. And in the middle of the interview, Sawyer seems to utter a trigger phrase. And this is what causes these subjects to dissociate from reality and go into one of these alternate personalities. So a handler is very skillfully equipped with these trigger phrases, and they know exactly how to bring out these different alters, and then when they're no longer required, to tuck them away again within the recesses of the mind. So it seems to me that Britney is reacting midway through this interview piece to a trigger phrase which she's just heard, and you actually see her slip out of her regular personality into an alternative one and dwell there for a bit and then pull herself together and snap back into front alter mode. This is very revealing.
It would test a lot of people. Illness in the family. A breakup. This spasm of publicity about what happened from Mexico to London.
It's pretty rough. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of weird. Weird. Hello. Oh my goodness. Hello. Ew. Strawberry. Yeah, it was weird. It's going.
So it seems to me there that the phrase from Mexico to London is the one that triggered that reaction. And many people, particularly young girls, look up to the likes of Britney Spears and they think, oh, what a great life they've got. I wish I could be like them. I'm sure many of these people that have been born into this kind of existence would trade places with the likes of us in a heartbeat, if only they were able to. Their lives are not lives of great privilege and great wealth. Yes, they may have the wealth, but they pay a very heavy price for it. And in the words of the late, great George Carlin, just summing up, and this may clip off the audio, but you probably know what he's going to say here.
You ain't in it.
It's a big club, and you ain't in it. And neither would you want to be either. So, in conclusion then, they, the occultists, the controllers, lie to our faces, but tell the truth cryptically for those who are able to decipher the obfuscation. That's where the symbolism comes in. So the nightly news and the proclamations of politicians will be pure deception, and usually a 180-degree inversion of the truth. Whereas it's in what we're trained to think of as fiction or entertainment that the truth so often lies, albeit concealed within layers of symbolism and allegory. When you learn about how lifetime actors and culture creation work, the question becomes, are you happy you were duped and taken into confidence by these people? And would you like more of it? Or are you rather hacked off that you were treated as such easy fodder, rife for manipulation? And now that you understand how the game is played, do you resolve to never be fooled in the same way again? There's no shame in admitting you were bamboozled. All of us are, from the earliest age. The dignity comes from acknowledging that it happened and knowing better for next time. So it becomes a case of just making better choices. In the words of arguably the most famous rock song of all time, Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven, yes, there are two paths you can go by, but in the long run, there's still time to change the road you're on. So we have access to this type of information now. It's been closely guarded for generations, and no previous generation has stood a chance of knowing the sort of stuff that we now can. We're very privileged to have at our disposal this research tool known as the internet and the ability to do this research and to share our findings with each other. And it becomes a personal responsibility to do whatever each of us can to aid that process. So that's pretty much what I wanted to share with you today. And as I say, it is an overview. It's a very quick sort of encapsulation of my work of the past God knows how many years, and there's plenty more of it. But I have more in my books, which are over on a small table at the back there. The new one is called No One's Dad's a Plumber. And other than that, I want to thank you for listening. Cheers.